Hello again, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us for this midweek edition, Wednesday's edition of Alaska Weather, 29th day of December 2021. I'm David Percy, a meteorologist with the National Weather Service, and I'll be hosting this show. Up first, hazardous weather graphic showing still some red shaded areas in the central interior, mid to upper Tanana Valley, Fairbanks area, and that's out for tonight, actually ending toward midnight or this evening for the Tanana, Koyukuk Valley areas, and then most of the night for Fairbanks on up and toward Fort Yukon Flats area, and that's for wind and snow and blowing snow, reducing visibility is less than a quarter mile at times, along with several more inches of snow that may fall. And then that's surrounded by winter weather advisories there. You can see for Arctic Village, southeastern Brooks Range, also over toward Eagle, 40-mile country there down to Northway Toke, in those areas. Otherwise, no watches, warnings, or advisories out anywhere else around the state as the snow advisories have ended over the southeast coast. Satellite imagery showing the moisture moving across the panhandle there brought several inches of snow to some areas of the panhandle and warmer temperatures, of course, with the cloud cover there, but amounts fairly light, again 1 to 3 inches in some areas, and then rain falling along the North Gulf Coast. Yakutat picking up 1/3 of an inch of rain. Some of that fell as wet snow, and over toward Cordova some lighter amounts of just plain rain. And then up in the interior, some moisture there brought snow again into the central interior, Fairbanks area, and falling temperatures there, colder air blowing in on some westerly winds gusting as high as 45 miles an hour at Delta Junction, and snow about 1 to 2 inches fell, say, around Coldfoot. Otherwise, Caltech picked up an inch of snow in the last 12 hours. Heavier snow around Kotzebue, where the main storm center was, as it pulls northward. That brought about 4 to 6 inches of snow there today to Kotzebue. And even winds gusting 40 miles an hour in Eureka, western Copper River Basin area there. And Nome, seeing winds gusting to 46 miles an hour out of the west, and much colder temperatures than what you saw yesterday, 24 hours ago. Mid-30s, today 6 degrees below zero with those winds, and below zero across St. Lawrence Island. So much colder air wrapping in about around that low center that's pulling northward and weakening. Also, strong north to northeast winds, about 46 miles an hour, recorded at Point Hope. That's starting to diminish down to about 30-35 miles an hour this afternoon. Out in the Pacific, kind of a frontal boundary there, bringing some more moisture into the eastern Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula area with another warm front. And yet another system that's kind of off the chart there, just barely getting on the map. We'll see on this chart, 983 millibar low, much stronger than the 1008 millibar low that's bringing the moisture into the Fox Islands and Alaska Peninsula today. Otherwise, snow over the interior, low pressure over the panhandle brought the warmer temperatures with the areas of snow, some of that mixed with rain out along the south coast. Tonight, we'll see the storm south of the Aleutians moves northward, and this gets north of about Adak around 3 a.m. tomorrow morning, tonight. And that pushes a front with gale force winds and increasing rain, more warm temperatures into the Alaska Peninsula, Fox Islands area. Rain moves back into the Pribilof Islands. Tight gradient on the backside of that low, so look for some high-end gale force winds for the western Aleutians. And then snow beginning to diminish, especially after midnight tonight over the eastern interior, but light snow will continue throughout the night with that trough just south of the upper Yukon River there. Otherwise clearing out and colder. Seward Peninsula, North Slope, Arctic Coast staying cold there with temperatures anywhere from 35 to 45 below zero for the overnight lows, and clear and colder for southern Alaska. Snow showers end and starts to clear out again. Maybe not quite as clear as what I've got shown there, but definitely be much drier for the southeast coast. And chance of some shower activity for Kodiak Island with a weak trough there, kind of splitting off remnants of that frontal boundary that's currently moving eastward and weakening quite quickly. And for tomorrow, that frontal boundary pushes or makes landfall along the southwest coast at mid-afternoon, early to mid-afternoon. Snow blowing, snow moving to the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta. Maybe Kuskokwim Valley will see some snow move in. And into southern Cook Inlet, snow or mixture of rain or snow. Kenai Peninsula, western North Gulf Coast, central and eastern North Gulf Coast should stay dry with just increasing clouds. Should be a variably cloudy day with light winds for the Copper River Basin. Some lingering light snow showers along that weak trough there, extending from the mid-upper Yukon Valley, or from the mid-Tanana Valley, northeastward there toward Eagle, and then up towards, say, Old Crow, with a dry back to the west, high pressure over the north slope, light winds, temperatures stay well below zero, and quite an intense storm. Not terribly too strong there, but gale storm force winds for the central Aleutians, west-northwest winds, and over the western offshore areas of the Bering Sea, with southwest winds and rain periods of for the eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula. And moving on to Friday, you can see another system, another front pushes storm force winds into the far western Aleutians late in the day. Otherwise, light winds with some clearing for Adak and Atka under a narrow ridge of high pressure. And the pressure difference between that ridge and the low center over the Alaska Peninsula produce strong north to northwest winds, maybe up to 45 to 50 miles an hour. Even higher gusts, Alaska Peninsula possible late in the day, and that'll pull colder air southward once again. Snowfall levels will come back down towards sea level, but probably not until Friday evening for the Fox Islands, Alaska Peninsula. Definitely for the Pribilofs, colder, and then becoming drier. And it stays cold and breezy over the western and north interior, especially the Brooks Range. The exception, light winds for the Arctic coast and north slope. And rain and snow moves into southern Alaska. And rain makes landfall on the panhandle on the coastal areas with a mixture of rain or snow over the inside waters. Low temperatures tonight down that way, anywhere from 10 to 15 northern panhandle to lower 20s to the south. Single numbers to 15 above, Manuscus, Sitna Valley, Kenai Peninsula, lower 20s down toward Homer, near freezing for Kodiak, back below zero for the Copper River Basin, and 10 below St. Lawrence Island, generally 5 to 15 below Central Interior, and then 25 to 35 to near 40 below for the Arctic Coast North Slope, upper 30s for the Aleutians, 40s for your lows for the Alaska Peninsula, to 45 in Unalaska. Highs tomorrow just almost 50 degrees at Dutch Harbor, once again near 40 for the central Aleutians. Otherwise in the teens, 10 to 20, say, south central Alaska, and 20s to lower 30s for the Panhandle. And then highs on the Arctic coast below zero and right around zero in the central interior, lower to mid-teens for the Tanana Valley. Staying below zero for St. Lawrence Island, but near 40 for the Pribilofs. St. Paul low the following morning, 25. You can see below zero north of the Alaska Range, 0-degree isotherm line right along the mountains there, except into the Copper River Basin. It'd be more toward the Coast Range. And 5 to 15, south central Alaska, lower 20s near the Kachemak Bay. In the teens to lower 20s for the Panhandle, except warmer out toward the coastline. And 35 to 40 below for the North Slope, and 25 to 40 below for the Arctic coast. And looks like lows in the lower 30s for the Aleutians, and then highs upper 30s to near 40 for the Aleutians. Some areas a little bit warmer, like Unalaska and Shimei at 42, but only freezing near St. Paul. Highs upper 30s Kodiak Island, 15 to 25 southern Alaska, below zero north of the Alaska Range, all the way out to the Arctic coast.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Flying weather, some marginal VFR there, Central Arctic Coast, and IFR, Eastern Brooks Range, down across the Porcupine Yukon River to near Eagle, and marginal VFR across the Tanana Valley, Alaska Range, and northwestern Copper River Basin, and maybe the northern Susitna Valley, otherwise VFR, Cook Inlet, Prince William Sound, Copper River Basin, all of the Panhandle. And western interior, marginal VFR coming into southern Cook Inlet, Kamishak, Kachemak Bay, IFR slipping on up to southwest Kodiak Island, across the Alaska Peninsula, offshore areas of Bristol Bay, IFR, Cape Newenham, and the west and southwest part of Nunivak Island to the Pribilofs, western Aleutians, Adak, Atka, out to Shimei and Attu, all IFR, Unalaska Island, IFR, to the western Alaska Peninsula. And for the afternoon, we'll see the zone of IFR out there pushes northeastward quite rapidly. So Fox Islands, Alaska Peninsula becoming VFR in the afternoon, IFR Adak and Atka, then back to the VFR, Amchitka Island to the Komondorskis, IFR for the Pribilofs to St. Lawrence Island, Nunivak Island, Kuskokwim Bay, Togiak Bay, Bristol Bay, and possibly the southern Kuskokwim Valley. Marginal VFR holding over southern Cook Inlet, not quite getting any far more than Kachemak Bay. And good VFR, most of interior Alaska, some lingering marginal VFR there over toward Eagle, north and south along the upper Tanana, upper Yukon River, and the Central Brooks Range, western North Slope, but VFR for the Panhandle. And for the morning, Friday, band of IFR now, Fox Islands, Pribilofs, Kuskokwim Bay across southern Alaska, down along the eastern North Gulf coast to about Cape St. Elias, and it drops south of the coastline and moves into the central and southern coast of the Panhandle. Marginal VFR into Yakutat, areas of marginal VFR north of the Alaska Range, especially the North Slope. And then for the afternoon, IFR showing up Central Brooks Range, part of the North Slope out to the eastern Arctic coast. IFR, next batch coming into the southwest Bering and western Aleutians. VFR, Adak, Atka, maybe St. Paul, St. Matthew Island, St. Lawrence Island. You can see all the western interior there from the Cape Lisburne area right on down to about Cape Newenham. And then IFR for the eastern North Gulf Coast and the Panhandle. 4 passes. Marginal VFR for Anatuvik. Adigan looks to be VFR. A little better off to the east there. And for Lake Clark and Merrill, good VFR either approach tomorrow afternoon. Rainy, same forecast. VFR, eastern entrance and the west side through the pass as well. Good VFR for Windy. And Isabel looking VFR. And a VFR kind of day for Mentasta as well as Tanita. And Portage, VFR. VFR for Chilkoot and Hawaii. It's a pretty good day through the passes coming up for tomorrow. And freezing levels, 2,000 feet, 2,000 to 4,000 feet, just north of the Pribilof Islands, cutting through Bristol Bay there, 8,000 feet over the Alaska Peninsula. And at the surface now, west of the Panhandle, cutting right across Kodiak Island and just north of the Pribilofs. Icing, band of moisture there, could be some considerable moderate rime icing. Kodiak Island, also for the along the southwest coast there, say Cape Newenham, Kuskokwim Bay, possibly Nunivak Island, and then just south of St. Matthew Island, with pretty widespread area of isolated moderate rime or mixed icing, central Bering Sea down to Amchitka Island, eastward to Unmak Island. Otherwise, the remainder of interior Alaska looking pretty good and icing free. Jet stream, southwest flow, 130 to 145 knots, turns westerly across southern Alaska, 150 to 55 knots into the northern Panhandle, returns northwest, drops back to about 120 knots there, just east of Dixon Entrance, then lighter winds as you head north. 9,000 feet, cold upper low over the North Slope Brooks Range, and just to the south of that feature, we've got 80 knot westerlies that diminish and turn more northwest as they head across the Copper River Basin into the eastern Gulf of Alaska there, but 65 to 70 knot northwesterlies across the Panhandle. Weak high pressure developing there near Nunivak Island, and to the south of that, we've got 70 knot westerlies just catching southern Kodiak Island. 3,000 feet, west winds 50 to 55 knots in the interior areas. And moving on to turbulence, widespread moderate chop of that big storm coming into the Bering Sea. So Aleutians, moderate chop, Alaska Peninsula, St. Lawrence Island.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder. As you well know, you can get forecast information for any day of the week. Today, tonight, tomorrow, out to 6 or 7 days. It includes the high and low temperature, the wind direction, the chance of rain or snow in your part of Alaska. But did you know that there is information available to forecast out to 2 weeks? So the question is, how would you use that information? And here to answer that question today and tell us a lot more about climate services from the U.S. National Weather Service Alaska region is Rick Toman. He's the program manager for the Climate Science and Services. And Rick, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
How would we use information that is out to 2 weeks instead of just the high and low and the chance of rain?
Well, Dave, as we move out in time, of course, forecasts become more uncertain. So as we move into that second week from now, we're not looking at specific highs or lows or precipitation amounts at any given place. What we can do with the state of the science at this point is get a handle on patterns. So we can say things like increased chances for stormy weather in the Bering Sea in 2 weeks, or we've been in a cold weather pattern, looks like 8 to 10 days from now, that pattern's going to change. Those are the kind of forecasts that we can currently make in that second week.
So you're increasing lead time for perhaps big or small weather events and telling us the likelihood of maybe more coastal storms or wind events in some areas?
Those are the kinds of things that that we hope to be able to let Alaskans know in the second week forecast. And if you have an activity or an event that you would find that kind of advance notice useful, whether it's moving stuff off of the beach, whether to go out hunting or to come back from camp, those kind of decisions, the week 2 provides the opportunity for you to get a handle on that kind of information.
Okay. What other type of weather impacts that we're familiar with might Alaskans use climate services for?
Well, in the forecast realm, we can go provide some information from this week 2, say the 8 to 14 day period, on out to the monthly and even seasonal time scale. Now, those monthly seasonal forecasts are still kind of just really very much pattern dependent, and the amount of detail that we can provide at this point is still pretty limited. Generally, indications of how temperature and precipitation will fall in maybe above normal, below normal kind of range. But in the week 2 period, we can be considerably more specific than that as far as the general patterns and really the impacts on Alaskans.
Okay, so we would be talking about generalizations there that would tell us that the period might be more stormy, might be more hot, more dry, more cold, and situations like that.
That's correct. So we're not going to be able to say in which community, for instance, there's the threat of coastal flooding, but we can often be able to tell we're moving into a pattern that would be conducive to big Bering Sea storms. So if you're in an area that could potentially impact you, you'll want to pay attention to the weather forecast.
Okay. Now, every day and every hour of the day, the National Weather Service is working on a forecast for the next day. But how do you start your forecast process for that extended period that goes out beyond 7 days?
Well, the way things work right now, we start off with the expected general flow pattern for Alaska and the whole world, really, and then we narrow that down to Alaska. So we start off with the basic computer model forecast. There's quite a few different computer models that we look at, bring those together. And then another important part of that is we attempt to assess the confidence. The reality is often 2 weeks away, the computer models are very divergent. They have lots of different solutions, and that's an indication that we don't have much confidence. But when we see more agreement in that time frame, and when that agreement is a pattern that will be potentially very impactful for Alaska or is a big change from what we've been in, that's when we can then take that expected pattern. We have computer models forecasting it. We've assessed the confidence. Now we can move that forward. How, using our experience as Alaskan weather forecasters, how does that typically play out for Alaska? So is this a stormy pattern for the Bering Sea? Is this an extra rainy period for Southeast? Is this the kind of pattern that generates strong winds potentially in the Anchorage Bowl? Is this a deep cold pattern for the interior? All of those are the kind of things that we're looking at in these large-scale patterns. That's very different than telling you that the winds on 10 days from now are going to be gusting to 120 on the hillside. We're looking for patterns, not the very specific information that the Weather Service will then hone in on as the event gets closer.
So the idea is to keep the 5, 6, 7 day forecast the same, where you are getting the standard high and low temperature and the chance of wind or rain, but further out you get a broad general forecast, but as the time gets closer to that event, we'll get a lot more specific.
That's correct.
Okay, very good. So how can people use this information if I am out in the bush and I want to see, is a coastal storm expected in my region, or is a chance for that improving over the next 2 to 3 weeks? Where could I go to get information like that?
When we see that potentially impactful or a big change in the weather is coming 8 to 14 days out, typically we will start to highlight that on the Weather Service Facebook site. We might produce a YouTube video highlighting that, linking that on our Facebook site. So often at this point, we don't have much to say in that because we're really looking for those forecasts of opportunities. But one thing we can say very likely as we go through the next 2 or 3 years, there'll be more and more of this kind of forecast information available in that week 2 time frame.
Okay, and something that emergency managers and city planners and folks in villages might be interested in keeping an eye out for, looking for that information to be headlined, whether that's on social media or perhaps through the National Weather Service channels there to get information from you to make better plans a little bit longer term and make better preparations in the event that things become a little bit more unsettled.
Absolutely. Climate Services with the National Weather Service Alaska region is talking to the state of Alaska every week, apprising them of that 2-week outlook. And on the social media side, we are working to keep Alaskans informed so that when we think we have some confidence in a high impact or a big change, that's the best way right now for folks to find out about that. Twitter, Facebook, so stay tuned to your National Weather Service.
Very good, a developing program. Rick Tolman with the National Weather Service Alaska region. He's a Climate Science and Services Program Manager. Thanks so much for joining us again, Rick, and I hope to have you back again soon.
Great, thanks Dave.
For another edition of Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder. We'll see you next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Look for gale warnings on the outer coastline of the southeast coast there. For the south coast, southwest to southeast at 35 knots, and then southeast 35 for the central and north coast, with seas 14 to 16 feet. Small craft advisories for Clarence Strait, southeast winds 25 knots, and 20 knot south winds for Stevens Passage, Lynn Canal, northern inner waters, inside waters there, south of 15. And for Thursday, for the Prince William Sound area, North Gulf Coast, pretty light winds at 10 knots, all the way down to the Barren Islands. And then we've got small craft advisories, southern Cook Inlet in toward Kamishak Bay, north to northeast winds at 25 knots, seas 7 feet. And north of the Forelands there, northeast winds 15 knots. And for Friday, Prince William Sound, northeast winds 20 knots. Gale warnings for the eastern North Gulf Coast, southeast at 35 knots. And then the western North Gulf Coast, north winds at 30 knots with 10-foot seas. Winds really pick up as you head to the Barren Islands west, 45 knots, 15-foot seas. Storm warnings out for Kamishak Bay, north winds 50 knots. And southern Cook Inlet, north winds 25 knots. North of the Forelands, north at 15. And for Kodiak Island, on the east side, south winds 25 knots with 8-foot seas. Otherwise, Sitkinak to Cape Sarachev, southwest winds 35 knots and southwest winds 30 knots. For the Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula, east at 30 for Bristol Bay. Outlook for Friday, full gales there for the Alaska Peninsula, west-northwest 45 knots, seas 16 to 21 feet. Storm warnings from Sitkinak to Castle Cape there, 55 knot winds out of the west with 20-foot seas. Gale warnings Kodiak Island, west winds 35 to 45 knots. Bristol Bay, northwest 45 knots with 11-foot seas. And for the Fox Islands, Unalaska Island tomorrow, gale warning, southwest winds 35 knots. Umak Island, south to southwest 35 to 40 knots. Storm warnings for the central Aleutians, west winds 40 to 50 knots. Storm warnings from Chitka Island, northwest at 50 knots. And then 45 knot northwest winds from Kiska to Shemya. Storm warnings for the area from Shemya to Kiska on Friday. Southeast winds coming up to 50 knots, seas building to 31 feet. Otherwise, gale force southerlies increasing to 40 knots there on Chitka Island, and gales for the Adak and Atka, west winds 40 knots with seas a little over 20 feet. Gale warnings for the Fox Islands. Northwest winds 30 to 40 knots with seas 16 to 25 feet. Southwest coast gale warnings for Thursday all the way up to St. Lawrence Island. Northeast winds 40 knots for the Yukon Delta coast to St. Lawrence Island. East 35 south of Nunivak Island. Northern Bering Sea gale warnings. St. Matthew Island northeast 45 knots. Small craft advisories for the Pribilof Islands as winds diminish to 25 knots. Seas subside to 10 feet. And for the day on Friday, northerly gales for the Pribilofs, 35 knots, northeast 35 for St. Matthew Island. Good gale force winds along the southwest coast, north 40 to 45 knots. And then brisk wind advisories, Norton Sound, St. Lawrence Island for north winds 25 to 30 knots. And up along the Arctic coast, light westerlies, 5 to 10 knots for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast and central coast and the west side there, northeast at 10. Cape Beaufort to Cape Thompson, north winds 15 knots, and then 20 knot winds, Cape Thompson to Wales. Brisk wind advisories from Cape Thompson to Wales on Friday. North winds pick up a little bit to 25 knots, 20 knot north winds up to Cape Beaufort, and then the western central coast north at 15, and the eastern Beaufort Sea coast west winds 10 to 15 knots. For tonight, high pressure kind of settling in over the north slope. That'll keep it well below zero, obviously, with light winds, some variable cloudiness, maybe a little bit of low clouds and fog along the coast. Nothing too serious. Areas of light snow, eastern interior, actually from about just north of Fairbanks there, White Mountains on up across the Yukon Flats to the border. Otherwise dry, clear, and a little chillier over the western interior, south central Alaska, and the Panhandle looking pretty good as the system pulls off to the southeast there. Look for clearing late tonight. Chance of rain, Kodiak Island, and then the storm pulling into the southern Bering Sea. Moderate amounts of rain and increasing wind, Alaska Peninsula, all of the Aleutians to the Pribilof Islands. And then for tomorrow, snow and blowing snow just clipping St. Lawrence Island, but moving into the Yukon Delta and the lower Yukon River Valley. Mixture of precipitation with the front and warm front into Bristol Bay and the Kuskokwim Delta. And on Friday, that whole system moves eastward to the Gulf.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.